misinformation, disinformation? Who's going to define lawful speech?
Well, I think lawful speech is something that's already out there. And free speech is lawful speech. We have free speech here in America.
You don't think that...
Chair recognizes Ms. BOEBERT.
Thank you. When you're throwing these amendments out and you have them very vague and broad, then that's where we have an issue. And we need to have a clear definition before we can consider these things. But lawful speech is already determined. We have freedom of speech, and the federal government interfering in that, colluding with big tech, that is the problem that we have. That's the premise that we're facing, where American citizens have their First Amendment right completely infringed by the federal government colluding with big tech. Thank you. I yield.
Colorado is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you holding this important hearing today. With the average price of gasoline nationwide currently sitting at $3.35, and the average hard rock mining project taking 7 to 10 years to go through the NEPA permitting process, clearly we must do more to streamline the permitting process and encourage responsible energy production. And I must just add that I'm not thrilled to hear the remarks from Mr. Squillace, excuse me, and the ranking member. It's coming, whether people like it or not. The Green New Deal, wind, solar, it's coming, whether people like it or not. We're not even going to allow the markets to decide. The markets were deciding with fossil fuels, and it was a reliable and efficient energy source. And then the federal government came in and shut them down and heavily subsidized wind and solar, so-called renewables that are not renewable. And now we hear it's coming, whether people like it or not. You're going to learn to like it because the federal government is going to put the restrictions and regulations to force you to have it, and you're going to like it whether you whether you want to or not. Praise the Lord. Look, I'm proud to support both of these well-crafted bills that we're here to discuss today that will do the work that's needed to streamline the permitting process and encourage responsible energy production here in America. I'm also thrilled that the TAP American Energy Act also includes the American Energy Act that I introduced. My bill, HR 1067, is important to the people in my district and will help reduce gas prices by providing certainty for energy producers. Now, Chief Operating Officer Knotts, you talk about this in your testimony, but the Biden administration continues to ignore the leasing mandates in the Mineral Leasing Act and the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act. Will this bill force the administration and future administrations to comply with the law?
Well, it certainly should. Again, thank you for the question. As I said earlier, the laws are there, but the Biden administration has not enforced the Mineral Leasing Act and OXLA. This bill will require quarterly lease sales, which is very important to get that process both onshore and offshore. And I just want to also stress again how important or how negative the president has been. I can't tell you the impact that the administration is saying no more drilling on federal lands, no more drilling offshore. The president's saying again, no ability for the oil industry to provide to continue to drill. Period.
He wants to end fossil fuels.
Has a dampening effect. Has a dampening effect on small producers that we represent to get out there and operate. And one other thing I would say is you're talking about the energy renaissance that happened with hydraulic fracturing. Nobody knew that. So if you're talking about we know what's going to happen, we know the market decided that. Energy producers, independent producers, took huge risks to go down, hydraulically frack, horizontal, and the energy renaissance has happened. Thank God that happened. Thank God that now we have a situation in Ukraine and elsewhere that people didn't say, oh, we're done. Our producers, American producers, went out and said, we're going to take the risk, small producers, and that's benefited all of us.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Knotts. Now, it was reported yesterday that President Biden was incorrect about his assertions that the industry is sitting on 9,000 drilling permits, according to the BLM. In reality, those numbers are much lower, potentially due to a clerical error, how convenient, or a computer system malfunction. Now, Mr. Knotts, you explain to those, will you explain to those in this subcommittee who have echoed those same remarks that Joe Biden said, that the revised number means, what the revised number means, and why the industry might not be able to use a permit immediately upon receipt?
So the numbers were, again, as we talked about 9,000, were by the agency's own admission reduced down to 6,600. Again, that will tell you how unclear the agency is on what's happening. The President of the United States himself used the 9,000 figure,
Correct.
which was wrong. Second of all, many of those approved permits are tied up in litigation, lawsuits from the environmental community, both in New Mexico and Wyoming. Leases are tied up. So as you're talking about leasing, it's really important to understand the tied up in litigation. And then finally, it's not just a spigot that you open up. Once you get a permit, it takes a huge amount of work. This doesn't happen overnight. So we certainly take exception to this idea that you can just turn these projects on and off overnight.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Knotts. My time has expired, and thank you to the witnesses who are here today.
Thank the gentleman from Colorado. The gentleman from Montana is recognized. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it. My friends across the aisle, when we talk about the cost of energy, choose to ignore the impacts of supply and demand and our domestic production being intentionally reduced by nearly 2 million.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I move strike last word. Oh, excuse me.
Yeah, Ms. Moffett.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Since we brought up COVID, I just want to respond and to remind the majority that COVID did not start under the Biden administration. It started under the Trump administration, and it was Donald Trump who closed businesses. It was Donald Trump who closed schools. It was Donald Trump who mandated masks. It was Donald Trump who came up with the vaccine, which I don't have a problem with, but if you have a problem with it, it was Donald Trump's vaccine. And so when we bring up COVID, we seem to have amnesia of when COVID started, who it started under. Right? You guys don't like Dr. Fauci, but it was Donald Trump who listened to Dr. Fauci. And so at the end of the day, you guys want to complain about things that happened under the last 2 years. You're allowed to have valid complaints, but what I'd love to hear from the majority is the criticism of the Trump administration and Donald Trump and the decisions that were made during that administration, which you guys use as talking points to hit the President of the United States over Joe Biden, but he was not in charge when those decisions were made. I yield back.
Will the gentleman yield? I'll respond. You want to hear a response from the majority? I'll be happy to respond.
Chair,
Sure, Mr. Chairman, I will.
Chair,
Thank you very much. You're right. President Trump was in office when the COVID virus was released from a lab in China, from the Wuhan lab. And he tried to make that very clear that this came from China. And reporters regularly dismissed that. They called him a xenophobe because he was just saying where the virus came from. He did not mandate masks. Your president did. Joe Biden did. We were on airplanes, all masked up, forced to be in masks, shut down our businesses, shut down our schools. Governors shut down our businesses and our schools. President Trump was very much in favor of federalism and saying, let the states choose. He didn't make any federal mandates. And there's plenty of vaccine mandates that came from Joe Biden. Ask our service members who have been wrongfully discharged, have not been reinstated, have not received back pay. And now what? If they want to continue to not serve, will they have an honorable discharge? We don't know, because even in the previous NDAA, that language was not strong enough. And so now that's another fight that we still have to have. What about all of our medical workers who are forced to have vaccines? That's the problem with the vaccine, not that it exists. Great, it was created. It's your choice if you want to get the vaccine, if you want to get the booster. It was forced on millions of Americans, and that is where the problem lies.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes, I yield.
Well, he asked, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you very much, and thank you for yielding, Mr. Moskowitz. But I appreciate the gentlelady's passion. There are two facts that she should perhaps be alerted to. One is that Donald Trump, on more than 20 different occasions, defended the performance of the Chinese government, and specifically President Xi, in terms of his treatment of COVID-19, and said he was doing a wonderful job and a great job, and they were working closely and they were constantly in touch. So if there's a problem with the Chinese government unleashing a virus which has not been proven anywhere, but it certainly could be true, you would have to pin that on your favorite president, Donald Trump, not on Joe Biden. The second thing is President Trump's own special advisor on COVID-19, Deborah Birx, I'm sure you're aware, and I'm sure you've read her book, said that the lethal recklessness of Donald Trump's policies about COVID-19 cost Americans hundreds of thousands of lives. So you don't have to believe anybody on the Democratic side of the aisle. That's Donald Trump's own special advisor on COVID-19. Thank you for yielding, and I happily yield back.
Chair, recognize Mr. Moskowitz for final 56 seconds.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll just close with this. Again, I don't have a problem having the conversation with the majority on what decisions that were made during an emergency that now that the lights are back on and we're no longer in the emergency, that they want to criticize. But that criticism needs to go both ways. It can't just be that COVID started only in the Biden administration and those decisions were made only in the Biden administration. I will have you know, and maybe you're not aware, but that the White House and the president called governors around the country, and the president himself instructed them to close. How do I know that? I was in the room. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Does any other member?
And thank you, Director, for being here with us today. On March 1st, 2021, Joe Biden said that it's time for the American people to get back to work. More than a year later, only 1 in 3 federal workers has returned to the workplace since the start of COVID, and far fewer than that right here in Washington, D.C. In fact, a leaked memo that I have here from January 2021 to the then Chief of Staff at the Department of Health and Human Services showed that between 20 and 30% of the department's employees did not even log into work on any given day between March and December of 2020. Mr. Chairman, I do ask for unanimous consent to submit this into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Because these bureaucrats have basically joined the pajama party, the federal government has somehow gotten even worse at serving the American taxpayers, from significant backlogs in case management and lengthy response times. These are issues that I deal with on a regular basis with my constituents who are having frustrations with federal agencies. These federal agencies have been unable to process retirement paperwork for seniors, correct errors on tax returns, and even fulfill requests for veterans to access files in order to access life-saving medical care. Now, Director HOWZ, do you know as of today what percentage or the number of federal employees that have returned to work full-time in person at their agency office?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I've mentioned before I don't have that specific data.
Thank you, Director. So you had mentioned that there is a public report, correct?
The telework report that we issue every
Correct.
year.
So we've gone through that report, that public report. It's the Remote Telework Enhancement to Enterprise Human Resources Integration Data Files. That number's not in there.
Well, I did mention also that we just released new data variables that we're going to be collecting through payroll service providers in order to be able to have more specific data.
So are you telling me that federal agencies track this percentage, or they're going to begin tracking the percentage of employees that return to work in person?
Well, the data is there. We just want to be able to bring it into one house and to be able to
Where
automate
is it currently if it's not under one house?
Well, the agencies house that data through their payroll providers, and that is...
And you weren't able to collect those and bring them in before your report was submitted yesterday? Why is this something that's brand new that you were looking into providing?
I think what you're referring to is the memo that we announced that we were actually going to be setting up the collection, and we want to be able to give agencies time.
I just don't understand why OPM, the director, would not know how many federal employees have returned full-time to work in person. Even if other agencies have this information, why don't you have that information? Director, according to the OPM website, it is official policy for the federal employee to receive a lump sum payment for any unused annual leave when he or she separates from federal service, meaning if any employee does not use all of their vacation time, they will receive payments sometimes totaling multiple thousands of dollars. Now, normal vacation days no longer have to be reported in the traditional sense under agency telework policies, allowing employees to claim that they will be teleworking and instead, well, they're spending all day at a swim-up bar in Cabo. So with over 25% of department employees not logging into work without agency officials or even the director of the OMB noticing, can you tell me, Director HOWZ, are the American taxpayers paying bureaucrats thousands of dollars to vacation under the guise of agencies' telework policies?
Well, Congresswoman, I actually take issue with the characterization that there's a change in policy. I'll tell you at OPM, individuals have to document their hours every pay period, and so I'm not aware of the policy change that you're speaking about.
You're not aware of any employee taking something that one would consider a vacation time and bringing their computer and maybe logging in just a portion of that time, or not at all? We have more than 25% of federal employees not logging into work, and they're teleworking.
Congresswoman, I do take issue with the characterization that 25% of individuals are not logging in.
It's in this leaked document right here that we just submitted into the record.
You're basing that from 2020, which was in the last administration, and I can't speak to that particular incident, and I don't know the particulars.
Do you currently know how many employees are logging in for telework? Do you have that number?
Congresswoman, that's not a
so
number that I would
we don't know
have.
anyone who's working full-time, part-time, in-person, telework. We have no idea.
Well, that's based on the agencies and the supervisors and managers, and they would know that.
Do you or do you not oversee personnel in the federal government?
We oversee personnel policy. Agencies manage their employees.
And you have no documentation of what employees are actually working in person or telework?
Agencies manage their telework and remote work agreements.
I hope that this gets straightened out. I hope that you get reports under one house. And please, do it soon for the sake of the American taxpayer. Thank you, and I yield.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Porter from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start by recognizing
Ranking Member Bush for her opening statement.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. St. Louis and I are here today to have a serious discussion about what energy security looks like for people, not corporations. This hearing is not that discussion. If House Republicans actually cared about preventing an energy and economic crisis from happening, they would commit to investing in renewable energy. Unfortunately, there are no serious proposals being offered. Rising inflation caused by Russia's violent invasion of Ukraine and COVID-19 pandemic-related supply chain shortages, combined with dangerous corporate greed and a reliance on fossil fuels, has left the United States in a tenuous position of expensive, unreliable, and unsafe energy. Let's be clear. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve was precisely created to be tapped in emergencies involving severe shortages of oil. Of course, I believe that the best way to avoid similar challenges in the future is to end our reliance on oil. But there should be no doubt that President Biden employed it explicitly for its stated purpose in an emergency when our nation's families and people needed it most. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, gas prices peaked at $4.88 in the Midwest region last year and are now down to $3.24 as of this week. People were struggling to get to doctor's appointments or to keep their heat on, and the Republican Party would have loved to do nothing. While the drawdown of the SPR was necessary to bolster supplies in an emergency, future events can be best ameliorated or prevented by reducing our demand for and our reliance on fossil fuels. But my Republican colleagues have unironically invited for-profit think tank and oil titans whose expertise is in maximizing profits, especially at the expense of our Black, our brown, and our indigenous neighbors' health, safety, and well-being. One of these so-called energy experts is a philosopher who has previously espoused white supremacist views. For instance, in his 2000 college newspaper, he wrote, quote, "The African and American Studies Department has 23 classes. In many of these classes, African culture is presented
Mr. Chairman,
not as
I demand the
inferior."
gentlelady's words be taken down. She just called a witness a white supremacist.
No, I referred to the words, not to the person, not to him, the words.
The gentlelady is referring to the witness's statement and referred to him
words?
as a white supremacist. I would like a parliamentary
did not.
inquiry into
The
having
chair-
the
no, excuse
gentleman's
me.
I did
words
not.
taken down.
The chair recognizes Congresswoman Boebert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like a parliamentary inquiry into taking down the gentlelady's words, the ranking member's words, for insinuating that our witness made white supremacist statements using his words.
Okay. The chair cannot take down words that are directed toward a witness, only to other members. All right. The chair recognizes Ranking Member Bush to continue her opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it appropriate for the ranking members to show respect to the witnesses who are here present in the committee room today?
I think it would obviously be warranted to show respect for any witness.
I would like that sentiment to be expressed and the members to be reminded to show respect to our witnesses who are here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Ranking Member Bush.
As I was saying, the African and African American Studies Department, this is the quote, has 23 classes. In many of these classes, African culture is presented not as inferior to Western culture, but as on equal footing with it. In other departments, the same is done with Latin American, Indian, and American Indian culture, end quote. When confronted about these views over 2 decades later, rather than disavow them, he doubled down on this narrative saying, quote, "It has nothing to do with skin color. I was arguing that those cultures overall are inferior to Western culture." We are not inferior to any culture, speaking as a descendant of one of those cultures. This is the witness the Republicans invited to discuss issues of energy security. He came here to promote fossil fuels, which we know are disproportionately harming and killing Black and brown people. Last week, I joined Ranking Member Raskin and all of my Democratic oversight colleagues in calling on oversight Republicans to denounce white nationalism and denounce white supremacy in all its forms. Not one single Republican joined us. So I ask again today, will my Republican colleagues condemn white supremacy and work with us to ensure this committee engages in advancing good and reducing harm rather than perpetuating it? That is respect. Our committee needs to be focused on actions that will help people and prevent financial hurt and pain. Whether we deploy the SPR or we don't, the instability of our energy system will continue if we are reliant on oil. Our committees need safe, reliable, renewable energy, and more investments in public transit. Thank you, and I yield back.
From Colorado, Ms. Boebert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Almost 3 years of COVID madness, mask mandates, vaccine mandates, a $4.6 trillion spending spree, school, church, statewide shutdowns. This committee is finally committed to getting to the bottom of the $560 billion in taxpayer money that was lost in waste, fraud, and abuse. The GOA estimates that there is still $90.5 billion in COVID-19 relief funds that remain available for obligation and are vulnerable to that same waste, fraud, and abuse. GOA and IGs have identified multiple recommendations to protect against waste, fraud, and abuse that have yet to be implemented by the Biden administration. Instead, they have thrown more money at the problem. Rather than being reactive and spending more money to find money, the federal government should enact policies to ensure that this kind of abuse never occurs again. Media reports have found that payments were made to over 500,000 federal prisoners, Japanese citizens living in Japan, illegal immigrants, and 1.1 million deceased individuals. In addition to this, our office issued an advisory around claims using Social Security numbers filed in multiple states and filed under suspicious email accounts. Now, I know that some of my colleagues have inquired about these Social Security issues that we're having, but Inspector General Turner, if I may, what mechanisms are currently in place for states to identify these suspicious Social Security numbers and identify these instances of fraud before they happen?
I would say IT modernization is one of the keys, but also a lot of the states are using the Integrated Data Hub, which the National Association of State Workforce Agencies are using. Only challenge with that is that is a volunteer, program, so it's not required, and so therefore they don't get a chance to do the cross matching that is needed.
Okay, good to know that that's just a volunteer. And are there any specific challenges states are having to access the master death file at the Social Security Administration?
I believe that the IDH as well, that's where they can do that cross-matching, and they do use the master death file.
And it was also mentioned that your office has referred over 23,000 fraudulent claims that cannot be processed federally back to the states for further action, and you are tracking those. Have any criminal referrals aligned with this been made from any of the IGs? Have there been any criminal referrals issued for the waste, fraud, and abuse?
I'm not, are you saying about from the 23,000 or just in general?
In total.
There's,
so I'm sorry, I know about the 23,000, but over all of this, have there been any?
Yeah, we've had 1,200 indictments, and we've had 600 convictions.
Incredible, thank you. And Inspector General Shoemaker, with over $76 billion of potential fraudulent PPP and EIDL loans, what is SBA's plan to investigate these cases, and how does your office plan to conduct the oversight for this plan?
Sure. So our investigative work so far has resulted in 793 indictments, 635 arrests, 446 convictions. We've received $20 billion returned from the borrowers in the EIDL program, as well as $8 billion from the financial institutions. We have over 500 cases ongoing at present. We work cooperatively with the DOJ, Joint Strike Forces. We have high success rate in bringing, we bring evidence to the prosecutors. They're willing to take these cases, and the wrongdoers are getting significant sentences, 4 or 5 years.
Thank you very much, Inspector General. And actually, Inspector General Delmar, same question to you. Any criminal referrals, indictments, prosecutions that have taken place?
Yes, ma'am. I don't have the number with me. I can certainly get that for you. We've worked with the Department of Justice, and we've worked with some state agencies as well. We also pursue and encourage civil remedies to recover the funds.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all three of you being here and testifying before this subcommittee today. Appreciate your work and your service, and with that, I yield.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Representative BOEBERT for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So obviously the day that he took office, Joe Biden unilaterally declared an all-out war on American energy production, from shutting down the Keystone XL pipeline, which has been mentioned. On our left, policies driven by progressive D.C. Council members are having a deteriorating effect on education standards, rising crime, and increased financial instability in our nation's capital. Last Congress, Democrats only had one single hearing with a D.C. Council member witness, and it was related to their pursuit of statehood, not actual oversight. Mr. Allen, you stated public safety is a priority for you, and police are essential to reducing crime, yet your policies restrict and weaken law enforcement officers' ability to keep the public safe. You demand more help from police in tweets like this one, yet you strip law enforcement's funding with budget squeezes. Mr. Lee, How much was the Metropolitan Police Department's operational budget cut from 2020 to today?
It's my understanding it's roughly $25 million.
So the statistics I have, Mr. Lee, from the DC Fiscal Policy Institute state that from 2020 to current, MPD's operational budget has been cut by more than $61.5 million. Mr. Allen, you even called to reduce MPD's budget, as we've heard today, by $15 million in 2020 after the Antifa-led George Floyd riots. Sir, you are defund the police. Chairman Mendelson, you stated that there is not a crime crisis in D.C.
Correct.
I would disagree. Mr. Allen, you even seconded the chairman's statements today and went as far to say that D.C. is strong and vibrant. Do you stand by that comment? Do you stand by seconding those remarks? The chairman's already stood by his remarks with his response.
The District of Columbia is incredibly strong and vibrant, yes.
Do you agree that there is not a crime crisis in Washington, D.C.?
As I outlined in my testimony, we've seen reductions in both violent crime and property crime, except for two main categories.
I would disagree. So that's very troubling.
Homicides.
Let's start with a few statistics. Sure. From 2022 to 2023, sex abuse cases increased by 110%.
To 38, a total of 38.
From 110%, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
That is alarming. Even 1% is alarming and should not be happening, especially when you were cutting MPD's funding and limiting them to protect people from these sexual assaults.
Congresswoman,
2022, reclaiming my time, sir. It's my time. 2022 to 2023, homicides in D.C. increased by 23%. 2022 to 23, carjackings, not car thefts, carjackings increased by 108%. Chairman Mendelson, do you still stand under oath and state that there is not a crime crisis in Washington, D.C.?
Yes, because if you look at carjackings,
it's remarkable.
for example,
Absolutely
let's
remarkable.
look at robberies overall.
I'd like to talk about,
down.
Thank you. Mr. Allen, based on these statistics, I would like to talk to you about some other things that are going on here in Washington, D.C., specifically an initiative that you led. In November of 2022, you led the charge to reform D.C.'s crime laws. Is that correct?
I chair the committee that proposal came
You
through.
led this charge, yes, sir. And these changes are now law here in D.C., correct?
Do you mean the revised criminal code?
Yes.
No, those are not the law.
Those are not the law.
The revised criminal code was rejected by...
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I'm talking to Mr. Allen.
Yes,
Mr. Allen, did you or did you not decriminalize public urination in Washington, D.C.? Did you lead the charge to do so?
No, the revised criminal code left that as a criminal charge.
Did you lead the charge to decriminalize public urination in Washington, D.C.?
No, ma'am.
Did you ever vote in favor of decriminalizing public urination in Washington, D.C.?
The revised criminal code that was passed by the council kept it as a criminal offense.
And you support this?
I voted for it, yeah.
You voted to keep it as a criminal offense?
That's correct. The full council did.
We have records that show that you were in favor of removing that criminal offense and allowing public urination.
No,
Is that something that you intend to pursue in the future?
No. The legislation you're referring to that came from the Criminal Code Reform Commission changed public urination from a criminal to a civil offense. The council then changed that to maintain it as a criminal offense at the request of the mayor.
Thank you. I yield.
This is Congresswoman BOEBERT for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today we're here to conduct some oversight on the Biden administration's policies that are regulating our communities into poverty. The Biden administration's all-out war on domestic American energy has resulted in record-high inflation crisis that has shifted the cost of Joe Biden's multi-trillion-dollar spending spree to the American taxpayers. While my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to play the blame game, they seem to be pointing the finger at everyone but themselves. It's really unfortunate to hear energy crisis stories, energy poverty stories, where a mother has to choose between feeding her family or paying the electric bill. But that's where more than 20 million Americans are right now because of Joe Biden's energy policies that he enforced on Americans January 20th, 2021, where we were energy secure, and he completely surrendered that energy security. This week, House Republicans are pushing back against the left's anti-American, anti-energy policies to pass H.R. 1 to put us back on track towards energy independence and, in turn, reduce inflationary pressures and lower costs for families. Dr. Paul, in your recently released paper, An Economics Case for Restrictive Supply-Side Policies, you advocate for nationalizing the United States oil and gas industry. Do you still agree with that statement?
Yes, in that research paper, we highlight 10 policies that would facilitate
So let me get this straight, Dr. Paul. So you support a communist-style takeover of our oil and gas industry? Because that's exactly what this is, nationalizing our oil and gas
The
industry.
majority of countries around the globe that have substantial fossil fuel reserves have public ownership of those reserves.
This
so that
is
they
a
can manage it
communist-style
in-
takeover, and we've even heard from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that they never want to invest in fossil fuels and the infrastructure of it here in America again, which is quite alarming. Dr. McPherson, prices for heating American homes rose by more than 27% in the past year. And in my home state of Colorado, we had a very cold winter, which means these increased costs hit even harder for the people that live in my district, in Colorado's 3rd district. Do you think that the Biden administration's proposal to place a ban on gas stoves nationwide will reduce energy prices for people in my district?
No, it's going to force them to, unfortunately, have to purchase a new stove if that were to come to pass.
Yes, and we've seen this administration make other extreme proposals for families concerned about energy costs, including Mayor Pete, who had the nerve to say that families concerned about high gas prices should just shell out $55,000 for an electric vehicle. So we have some politicians saying, you know, just go buy brand new electric appliances. Others saying, completely ditch your car and get an electric vehicle. Now, Dr. McPherson, do you think that simply buying new electric vehicles, as Mayor Pete recommended, is a realistic energy solution for American families living month to month and already struggling to pay their bills?
There are hidden inflationary effects within electric vehicles, which in the right place, in the right context, for the right people, are excellent. But we have to remember, to fill up an electric vehicle at the moment, it takes about 30 minutes or so to fill up a tank, so to speak. You can get about 170 miles out of that. But if you've got kids, for example, you've got a family, you've got somewhere to be, you've got to be at work, that half an hour is going to add up. Now, if you're trying to transport freight, for example, across the United States, half an hour every time to fill up is going to add up. Now, that's either going to be reflected in workers' wages, because they're going to demand more, because that time and their time should be compensated, so that'll be inflation, or workers won't be compensated for all that time that adds up. There are hidden inflationary effects there we need to think seriously about.
Thank you, Dr. McPherson. And we've seen states like California say that we want to ban electric vehicles by 2035, and then the next week saying, hey, please don't charge your electric vehicles because our grid cannot handle this. With this, there's a lot of talk of decarbonization going on. I'm pro-forest management, which would certainly help with the reduce of carbon emissions that are emitted with the catastrophic wildfires. And I would encourage the witnesses to also just consider the fact that these solar panels require mining to be done in China-owned mines in the Congo for that cobalt where that child and slave labor is being used. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Chair recognizes Congresswoman Brown for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, I have to admit, I'm a little confused as to why we're having the same hearing again. We held an almost identical hearing just 3 weeks.
Ms. BOEBERT from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Comptroller Dodaro for joining us today. It is this committee's responsibility to investigate the root and root out causes of waste, fraud, and abuse and mismanagement. Noticeably, this year's report indicated that the Department of Health and Human Services leadership and coordination of public health emergencies, even though COVID is over, and the unemployment insurance system it was added to the high-risk list after the Biden administration has continued to fumble the ball when it comes to responsibly managing taxpayer dollars regarding COVID management. Comptroller Dodaro, for some background information, what are some of the ways that certain agencies and programs are added to the high-risk list?
Yeah, we consider a number of factors. One, we do ongoing work at GAO all the time across all areas of the federal government. So we look at our institutional knowledge of these issues. We consult each inspector general list what they believe the top management issues are in each of their individual agencies across government. So we consult that. We consider the amount of money that's involved. It has to be at least $1 billion. And we look at a lot of qualitative factors as well, the impact on public safety, for example, and other matters.
Thank you. The high-risk list this year included one very notable addition, the Department of Health and Human Services Leadership and Coordination of Public Health Emergencies. Can you elaborate on their failures of this program?
Yes. I'll ask Jess Farb, who's our expert in the healthcare area.
Thank you for the question. So we looked at HHS's response to public health emergencies over decades, so not just the most recent emergency that we're all familiar with, but response to Zika, response to natural disasters, responses to Ebola. And so looking at that, we found that HHS did not have a number of things in place that would have helped with this response, including understanding roles and responsibilities, the capacity of their partners, communicating clearly with the public, being transparent about actions that need to be taken. So there were a number of things that we observed over time across multiple public health emergencies that allowed us to sort of come to the conclusion that they needed to be added to the list.
Yeah, and I want to keep it visible to the American public and to the Congress, because I don't think we're anywhere near as prepared for the next emergency as we need to be.
So have these leadership failures at HHS contributed to other, it sounds like it does, other health emergencies like the baby formula shortage, the crisis at the border, and the several other natural disasters that took place just last year?
HHS is a very complex department, as we all know, and having multiple components that both need to act independently but also work together. We were talking about this earlier, how agencies need to coordinate not only across the government but also even within the department. And this is a case with HHS that they need to do more coordination within the department to respond.
The report found that the GAO has consistently found deficiencies in HHS's ability to lead the country's preparedness, as mentioned, and response for more than 10 years, which is quite literally their job to do. According to a report published in January of last year, you identified 246 total recommendations for improving federal operations at HHS alone. How many of your recommendations has the Biden administration implemented?
I believe we'll have to get back to you with an answer on that for the record. I don't know off the top of my head how many they've implemented, but they have implemented some recommendations. How many of that total number, I can't give you the number today.
Yeah, and I would say, HHS is one of the agencies that has a relatively lower percentage of implementing our recommendations than is a norm across the federal government. So we're trying to work to increase that, and whatever help we can get from the Congress, we'd appreciate.
Thank you. I look forward to assisting in that and hearing that we have bipartisan support and getting Congress to act to assist you in that. I think we should put that as one of our priorities here. Another notable addition to this list is the unemployment insurance system. In your report, you indicated this addition is largely due to large amounts of fraud and improper payments, which have come at a huge cost to taxpayers, of course. Did the rate of these errors in unemployment insurance systems increase throughout the 53-week extension from this administration?
It's been going on since during the entire pandemic, yes. Tom, would you like to add?
Yeah, the improper payment rate went up. It's now at 22%, but that doesn't include the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, where we expect that the improper payment rate is higher than that.
Thank you. My time has expired, and I yield. Thank you for your answers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mayor Bowser, is the District of Columbia more dangerous during your tenure?
Congresswoman, as you have heard, we have experienced over the last 10 years decreases in violent crime, all categories of crime. You also heard me talk about in my testimony, especially in the last 3 years, being very concerned.
What about since last year, Mayor?
What about it?
Is it more dangerous this year than it was last year?
I'm going to ask the chief to give you the data.
I'm asking, Mayor, because I see the crime is up 27%. That doesn't sound like a decrease to me. Violent crime is up 13%. And in 2020 and 2021, the city recorded more than 200 homicides in consecutive years for the first time in 20 years. So is Washington, D.C. more dangerous now that you're in office?
The nation is more dangerous with more guns and more violent
We're
crime.
talking about Washington, D.C. here, and we have also seen that the police budget has been cut, $15 million in 2020, Mayor. Do you think that this contributes to an increase in crime?
I think a lot of things have contributed to increases in crime across the country.
What about in Washington, D.C.? Do you think that the $15 million budget cut to MPD in 2020 caused an increase in crime here in the District of Columbia?
I think that we need to have 4,000 police officers over the course of the last several years.
So you want more police officers?
Yes.
Well, in the past, you've hired on average 300 new police officers each year, but in 2022, you hired 103. That's 200 less, and now you're advocating for more police officers after cutting their budget and hiring 200 less police officers.
I've advocated for more police every day as mayor of the District of Columbia. When I became mayor, we were facing a retirement bubble, and we set a course at that time for hiring and retention.
Did you believe that Washington, D.C. would be safer and more secure if you hired more police officers rather than decreasing the number of recruitment by 200?
We're not decreasing recruitment, but we are facing, as cities in police police departments around the country less interest in joining police
Why do you
departments.
think that is? Do you think that our police officers have been demonized because of the rhetoric that is flowing from this city and many other cities across our nation?
I think that policing is a tough job.
I would agree.
It's a job that has grown tougher over the years. And I think that
Particularly, when do you think it became more tough? Maybe when they were attacked for doing their jobs, protecting citizens? When they lost their funding?
Congressman, if I'm allowed to speak, I'll
Yes, ma'am.
answer you, but I'm not going to talk over you. And so it has been my experience in the last 8 years that we have had to use more incentives, and we have investigated and researched what it's going to take to attract young people to come into policing. One thing that we have done in the district, for example, is to create a police academy that we're very proud of. Chief Conti, in fact, joined the police academy when he was 17 years old and rose through the ranks to be chief
I don't need to hear
of
about
police.
childhood issues here.
Well,
So,
this is
no,
how we
no.
get.
Do you
This
think
is how
that
we get
defund the
police.
police signs around District of Columbia and advocating for this
I
is
didn't advocate to
incentivizing?
defund the police.
But you did defund them.
I
$15
did-
million
I did
budget
not-
cut.
I
A
did
$15
not
million
defund the
budget cut
police.
in 2020. So, Madam Mayor, what would you say to the law-abiding citizens here in Washington, D.C., who, because of policies you've supported, are unable to defend themselves with this rise in crime? Crime being up 27%.
Congresswoman, I don't have to come to here to talk to you, to talk to the residents of the District of Columbia. I talk to them daily. I have press
And what do you
conferences.
say to these law-abiding
I'm in
citizens?
What I tell them is that as their mayor, regardless of what's happening nationally, regardless of what's happening in our very complicated criminal justice system, as their mayor, I am charged with making it work. And if that
Is it
means
working?
it is, I am charged with making it work. And what I have
Do you
to
think that you're doing a good job with that? Because I'm seeing that crime is up, violent crime is up, homicides are up, police funding is down, police recruitment is down. So is it working?
Every day, we approach any vexing issue in our city, crime being among them, police recruitment being
Madam
among
Mayor, my time is up, but you know exactly what you need to make Washington, D.C. safer. You know that you need more police officers. You know that you need more
heard me
funding.
say
You know
that.
that you need policies that allow law-abiding
And you heard me say that.
citizens, thank you, ma'am, it's my time, law-abiding citizens to be able to protect themselves in their own home and defend them.
Ms.
You
BOEBERT,
know
it
it,
sounds
and
like
you wanted
you
to be a
heard
part
my
of the
opening
culture
statement.
war of the BLM 2020
Yeah.
riots,
It
rather than
sounds like
protecting
you
and
heard
defending
my
the police
opening
and the
statement.
citizens in Washington,
And you're
D.C.
repeating it.
And my time has expired.
And I'm
Thank you,
happy
Madam
to
Mayor.
repeat it as well. And what we have said, Mr. Chairman, if you would permit me, and that I was over-talked much of that 5 minutes, is that we have been very focused on how to make sure we have a policy environment that supports a safe city, but also that we approach it not just with law enforcement, but with opportunities and with prevention.
Your policies are clearly making your city more dangerous, not safer.
And ladies, time has expired. Chair.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Colorado, Ms. BOEBERT, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Director Stone Manning, so in Mesa County, one of the great counties that I represent, we have been waiting more than 5 years for a particular parcel. We've been waiting for the BLM to sell this 31.1 acre parcel of land in Clifton. It would be sold at a fair market value, and it's on the disposal list currently. And I just am curious if this is an issue that's on your radar.
Congresswoman, you just put it there, and I commit to you that I will look into it.
I would love to work with you on this. This is a big deal for my constituents in Mesa County. It's something I've toured the site and have legislation to support this. So if there's something that we could find to work together on, this parcel of land would be a great place to start. Now, my colleagues in this committee and in the House, they have claimed numerous times during debate that wilderness designations don't prevent or restrict active forest management. I'm curious if you agree with those sentiments.
Congresswoman, we do manage wilderness differently than we manage the front country, but we do have tools at our disposal.
So what are some of those tools? Because and particularly mechanical thinning is something that's prevented in wilderness areas, and we are reduced down to old, long, two-man hand saws. So do you think that is enough to manage our forests with 6 billion standing dead trees in the West?
That and prescribed fire, I think, is what is necessary.
A handsaw and prescribed fire rather than mechanical thinning. So as a follow-up, if we're serious about actively managing our forests, and I believe that we all are to some degree, we just have different ideas on how to get there, we have to prevent these catastrophic wildfires. And certainly prescribed burns is one great way to do that, and forest cleanup and reducing the fuels that are on the ground. But would you say that we need more mechanical thinning on a larger scale in these overgrown areas?
Congresswoman, we are focusing that work with great intent around the wildland-urban interface in order to protect people and communities. Last year, we did about 1 million acres of mechanical treatment. This year, we've got a goal of about 1.3.
And are you intending to increase the use of mechanical thinning?
Around communities, yes, we are. We're focusing the work in places that.
Well, so in my district, we don't have as many of those communities that would be affected, but we certainly have areas that my colleagues are trying to designate wilderness and already have, and that prevents us from actively managing our forests. And I believe that the greatest way to do this on a larger scale is to increase mechanical thinning. We have to reduce the 234 million acres of forest that's currently considered high risk for these dangerous and catastrophic wildfires. So that's another thing that I would love to work with you on, because we have to be good stewards of the land that we've been given, and actively managing our forests is one way to do that. Now, mineral lease sales, moving on, are required by law to take place at least quarterly. Accordingly, there should have been at least 9 rounds of lease sales in the past 2 years. With gas prices as high as they are, and there should have probably been more than 9, how many rounds of onshore lease sales has the BLM held in the last 28 months?
Congresswoman, thank you for the question. We held a lease sale in fiscal year 22. That was 5 sales, if I'm remembering properly. We have sales now, regular sales coming starting this month. But I think that
how many sales are scheduled for this month? Because I'm showing that the answer is 1. We've had 1 lease sale, and the BLM is not currently complying with law here, and truly hurting domestic energy production. So how many sales do you have planned?
Congresswoman, oil and gas production is at an all-time high on federal lands, and oil and gas corporate profits are at an all-time high. 14% of...
So I live in a drilling community, and I can testify that we have been regulated into poverty with our oil and gas production, because politicians get into office and virtue signal and make these false claims about our good, clean energy production. And unfortunately, it is hurting my constituents. And so if we could work together to increase these sales and increase future production, I think that would help the future revenues for essential services like schools, roads, firefighting, and all of the things that we care about so much. Director Stone Manning, I'm over my time, and I thank you so much for...
The gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. BOEBERT, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Postmaster General DeJoy, you testified that 98% of the nation's population is receiving their mail and packages in 3 days or less. What percentage of mail is delivered on time in rural areas in America?
I would say our overall standard of first-class mail is, to the service standard, is about 92, 93% right now. Marketing mail is 95%.
Okay, those are pretty high numbers. So I asked that because I've heard from my constituents over the past few years in rural America who are receiving terrible service from the Postal Service. I know a lot of issues have been brought up today, and we're working to get solutions with you. So thank you so much for being here and providing answers so we can try to work through this. But the struggles that we're seeing are veterans and seniors not receiving important prescriptions in a timely manner. Postal positions have been unfilled for long periods of time. Local post offices have been closed or had extremely limited hours. Packages have been seen piling up in lobbies. Some people did not receive a single piece of mail for 3 weeks in my district. Wait times exceed an hour in some places. And to make matters worse, extremely poor customer service is something that I'm hearing a lot of. Colorado City, it's south of Pueblo, went without its contract post office for approximately 6 weeks after the contractor wwho ran it quit because the Postal Service was not honoring his contracts. People in my district literally had to drive 30 minutes to Pueblo to get their mail, and I think you would agree that these things are unacceptable. Now Postmaster General DeJoy, an estimated 15,000 rural pharmacies were forced out of the Department of Defense Health Agency's Cigna Express Scripts reimbursement plan, and this has caused rural veterans across Colorado's 3rd District to rely solely on the Postal Service to receive their prescriptions. This has caused veterans to go without these prescriptions, most of which are necessary for the quality of their life, for upwards of weeks, and due to the delay in this delivery. Now, this is not only happening in our rural areas such as Cortez, Los Animas, Del Norte, Meeker, Rangeley, and just about all of these mountain communities, but it is even happening in major populated areas such as Grand Junction, Colorado, and in Pueblo, as mentioned. What steps are you taking to ensure that Postal Service no longer leaves our veterans going weeks without important quality of life prescriptions?
So specifically in Colorado, when I was made aware of the issue, and I met with your 2 senators, we put, and we're doing this in all the areas, making, as I said...
I'm sorry, when did you meet with the senators? If that's something you could recall.
A month ago,
okay.
2 months ago.
Okay.
But it really was from the January and beginning of February activity that was out there. I put a SWAT team out into the area, and we put moved 12 or 13 carriers up. We reestablished contracts, highway contracts in the area. We put additional management in I think 8 or 9 different locations around the mountain area, and we got the service flowing back on time. And as I said earlier, there's a lot of damage that was done, and then coming through the pandemic, these remote retail areas are the ones that are the longest for us to get back and the toughest for us to get back into, stable operating condition. And we're working on it. I think most of those areas in Colorado are significantly better than they were before. I watch the days to deliver, missed mail to delivery points and so forth. So I think, have you had any recent?
Yes, so we have had ongoing issues that have been brought to our attention, and specifically there was a period in time in October of 2021 when I reached out to you personally, and I was denied a meeting that we couldn't get this.
Reach out to me?
Yes, I did. And this was just about the unacceptable service that we were seeing in Levita at a post office in my district, and a government relations representative from Washington, D.C. responded and said a lie, stating that staffing issues were not impacting operating hours, and they absolutely were. So I am glad that you reached out to the senators and spoke for them. I'm grateful to hear what you are expressing to this committee about the commitments that you are making to address these issues, and I hope to work with you personally in the future and with your staff as well, because this is something that's very important to all Americans. So thank you so much for your time, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentleman.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Ms. BOEBERT from Colorado for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Duane, I think it's been mentioned many times here today, and I apologize that I wasn't here for a lot of it. We have other committees going on as well, but we've seen an increase in prices for medication and treatments over the past few years. You would agree?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that.
And I think that you all have elaborated as far as the why, and you're welcome to elaborate more if you'd like. But do you see that patients leave their prescriptions at pharmacies because they can no longer pay for it?
They absolutely do in my pharmacy, yes. That happens more than should make anyone comfortable.
I actually have a fun little story. My staff is probably going to talk to me about this later, but I left a prescription at a pharmacy once. I went to get birth control, and I was there at the counter and went to pay for it, and the price was very, very high. I said, wow, is this a 3-6-month prescription? No, ma'am, this is 1 month. And I said, it's cheaper to have a kid. And I left it there, and now I have my 3rd son, Caden BOEBERT, and so it turned out to be a really great thing. But I personally experienced that when times were tough. But thank you so much for your indulgence there, and talk to the team about that comment later. Excuse me, please. State your name for me.
Isasi.
Isasi, thank you. Mr. Isasi, now you state that drug launch prices have increased 20% per year from 2008 to 2021. Other than inflation, what other factors cause this price hike?
Drug makers' greed.
And you state that there are on average 125 patient applications per drug that extends their monopolies and blocks competition up to 4 decades. What kind of distinctability do these patients have from others to make them patentable?
Right. They're exceeding their patent. Their patent was supposed to last 9 years, maybe 11 years, if it's, or 12 years, and they're going for 40 years because they're just suing their way into greed.
And how could we end patent abuse without restricting someone's patentability?
I mean, this is so important. By really focusing in on this kind of greed, what we're actually doing is ending drug companies' ability to make money by just extending the existing intervention. We want them to stop making money at the 9-year and go find something else. And every year we let them keep making money from that same drug. We are killing innovation. So it's critically important.
Thank you. And Dr. Atkins, as an oncologist, can you give us an example in which PBMs have obstructed your patients from getting the medications that you've prescribed to them?
We could stay here all day, but I'll just give one.
Yes, ma'am.
Particularly what I mentioned earlier in my statement that I wrote a prescription on October 14th. I saw the patient 2 weeks later. He still did not have the medication. I asked him what had happened because we thought we could fill it at my dispensary in my practice. I found out from my pharmacist that our dispensary sent the prescription someplace else, and then the patient's PBM, CVS Caremark, took the prescription, told the patient, we haven't heard from your doctor. And we're like, that's not true. We've been going back and forth. Anyway, the patient got his medication on December 1st. So this happens very frequently.
Right, which presents consequences to your patients.
Definitely,
yes. Thank you very much, Doctor. Mr. Baker, on May 16th, your company changed the name and has a new tagline of patients over profits. What prompted this change?
Yeah, I think it really falls to a lot of the conversation here today. We think you can run a very viable organization that drives to highest clinical quality, lowest net cost,
and not focus on profit being your sole endpoint. So we really want to make sure that everything that we do and everybody we work with knows that patients come first. And you know what? This is a hundreds of billions of dollar a year industry. There's plenty of money left over to create a market-driven solution that still creates good profit for people.
Yes, and in your opinion, do you oftentimes see PBMs using rebates or promote expensive brand drugs, even if they don't work as well on patients?
We do. You can publicly available pull a lot of PBM formularies and continually see brand name drugs that have lost patent exclusivity that are now generics, but those are still the drugs that are preferred on those formularies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baker. And Dr. Atkins, do you mind explaining the protocol of step therapy or feel first?
Sure. Feel first. One example I gave are the antiemetic medications for nausea and vomiting for chemotherapy. There are certain drugs we want to use with certain chemotherapy because some drugs cause more nausea than others. So I may want to use drug X, and the PBM will say, no, you have to use drug number A, and if the patient fails that by getting really, really sick, then I can go back to the drug I want to use. That's one example of step therapy or fail first.
So you've seen patients be affected
Oh,
by
yes.
Yes. Do you think that patients are being failed by PBMs and their insurers?
I think they are. I mean, as a physician, my job is to take care of patients the best way I know how. And when I give a recommendation or write a prescription, and then someone else who does not do what I do, does not have my training, stands in the way of me taking care of my patients, that's definitely failing the patient.
Thank you. Well, I'm very excited to have had this hearing today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. It sounds like that we have a lot of things that we could work together on. Thank you so much to our witnesses here for providing your testimonies and your expertise here in this committee room today. I hope that we can provide solutions to help you help your patients and to get this problem that we all see as very detrimental under control. Thank you so much. I yield.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Mrs. Crockett from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.